I fled to avoid being committed by my toxic family. But I didn't run like a scared animal. I walked out like a woman going to war. The photographs were spread across my beach vacations where my husband Frank was still alive and our son still looked at me like I mattered. The papers were tucked between two photos from Kevin's 10th birthday party. A legal document, petition for emergency guardianship and involuntary psychiatric commitment.
Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching.
My name typed in cold black letters. Ruth Mitchell, the proposed ward. I read it 3 times before the words made sense. The petitioner was my son, Kevin David Mitchell, claiming I suffered from progressive dementia with paranoid features and inability to manage personal and financial affairs, claiming I had wandered from home on multiple occasions and made irrational accusations against family members, claiming I was a danger to myself. Every word was a lie. At 68 years old, I had never wandered anywhere. I walked 3 miles every morning at 5 a.m., same route for 15 years. I paid my bills online, managed my investments, volunteered at the Methodist Church food pantry every Thursday. My mind was sharper than Kevin's had ever been, but there it was. The hearing was scheduled for Tuesday, 3 days away. I turned to the second page and found the witness statements. Bernard Hoffman, psychiatrist, had signed a declaration stating he'd examined me twice and found significant cognitive decline consistent with early-onset Alzheimer's disease. I had never met Dr. Bernard Hoffman. I had never been examined by any psychiatrist. The third signature made my hands go cold. Brenda Louise Mitchell, my daughter-in-law, witness to my episodes of confusion and aggression, witness to my inability to recognize family members, witness to my dangerous behavior including leaving the stove on and forgetting to take medication. I had never left the stove on. I didn't take any medication. Brenda hadn't just signed as a witness. She had written a 3-page statement detailing incidents that never happened. Dates, times, descriptions, all fabricated with the precision of someone who had been planning this for months, maybe years. I sat there in my kitchen, the kitchen where I had made 10,000 meals for this family, and I understood something with perfect clarity. This wasn't about my mental health. This was about my house. The house Frank and I bought in 1982 for $47,000, now worth over $600,000 in Cincinnati's hot real estate market. This was about my savings. The $340,000 I had accumulated through 40 years of nursing and careful investing. This was about control. Kevin's business had failed last year. I knew he owed money. I didn't know how much. Now I understood why Brenda had been so attentive lately. The Sunday dinners. The phone calls asking about my health. The gentle suggestions that I seemed tired and forgetful. She had been building a case, documenting a fiction, preparing to have me locked away so they could sell everything I owned. My own son. I thought about calling him, confronting him, demanding an explanation. But what would that accomplish? He would deny everything. He would say I was confused, that I was misunderstanding, that this was all for my own good. And then Tuesday would come, and the judge would see a calm, concerned son and a hysterical old woman, and that would be the end of Ruth Mitchell. I had watched it happen to others. In my 35 years as a nurse, I had seen families do terrible things to elderly parents. I had seen the paperwork, the lies, the smooth-talking sons and daughters who visited only when there was money involved. I had always thought, not my family, not my Kevin. The arrogance of that assumption burned in my chest. I stood up from the table and walked through my house. Every room held memories. Frank's study, where he had worked on his accounting until the stroke took him 12 years ago. The living room where Kevin had taken his first steps. The bedroom where I had held my husband's hand as he died. The garden where I grew tomatoes and roses and believed I would spend my remaining years in peace. They wanted to take all of it, lock me in a facility while they divided my life like vultures over carrion. I returned to the kitchen and gathered the photographs. One by one, I looked at them. Kevin as a baby. Kevin as a boy. Kevin at his wedding, promising to love and honor while his new wife smiled her perfect smile. Kevin holding his son Brandon in the hospital, tears of joy streaming down his face. Where had that man gone? I walked to the backyard, to the fire pit Frank had built 20 years ago. I had newspaper and kindling already there from last week's yard waste. I struck a match. The flames caught quickly. I fed the photographs into the fire one by one. Not in grief, not in despair, in ceremony. I was burning the woman who had trusted blindly, the woman who had given everything and expected loyalty in return, the woman who believed blood meant love, that Ruth Mitchell was dead. The new Ruth Mitchell watched the flames consume 4 decades of memories and felt something unexpected rise in her chest. Not sadness, not fear, purpose. I had been a nurse for 35 years. I had worked emergency rooms, ICUs, nursing homes. I had held dying patients' hands at 3 a.m. while their families slept. I had fought doctors who didn't listen. I had advocated for patients who couldn't speak. I had never, in my entire career, backed down from a fight that mattered. This fight mattered. I went back inside and began to pack. Not everything, just essentials, clothes for a week, my laptop. Important documents I kept in the safe. Birth certificate, passport, social security card, the deed to my house, my checkbook, the $3,000 in cash I kept for emergencies. And one more thing. In my jewelry box, underneath the pearls Frank gave me for our 25th anniversary, was a fountain pen, black with gold trim. Engraved with the initials H.P. Harold Pemberton had been my neighbor for 6 years before they moved him to the assisted living facility downtown. 92 years old, sharp as a tack, with stories about old Cincinnati that made me laugh until I cried. He had been a widower for 30 years. His children never visited. When the ambulance came to take him away last spring, he had pressed this pen into my hand. "Ruth," he had said, "you're the only one who treated me like a person. Keep this. It belonged to my father. It's brought me luck for 60 years. I had visited Harold at the shelter downtown every week since then, not the fancy assisted living his family had planned. He had refused, said he'd rather live among honest poor people than comfortable thieves. The last time I saw him, he was thin and tired, but still sharp, still fighting. I tucked the pen into my bag. Then I sat down at my computer and made the necessary arrangements. I transferred $50,000 from my savings to a new account at a bank Kevin didn't know about. I forwarded my mail to a P.O. box. I canceled the newspaper delivery. I set my bills to auto-pay. I wrote no note. I made no calls. At 2 a.m., I carried my bag to my car. The neighborhood was silent. The house where I had lived for 42 years stood dark behind me. I didn't look back. I drove across the city to the Mercy House Women's Shelter. It was a place I knew from my nursing days, a place for women fleeing violence and abuse. The intake coordinator was a young woman named Denise, who didn't ask many questions. "I need a safe place to stay," I said. "My family is trying to have me committed against my will." She nodded as if she had heard this before. She probably had. "We have a bed available," she said. "How long do you need?" "As long as it takes." I settled into my narrow cot in a room with 3 other women. The youngest was perhaps 25, with bruises on her arms she tried to hide. The oldest was closer to my age, with the hollow eyes of someone who had seen too much. I lay awake in the darkness, listening to the breathing of strangers, and I made myself a promise. I would not return to that house until I had the power to protect myself. I would not see my son again until he understood what he had done, and I would find a way to make sure no one ever tried to take my life from me again. The pen was in my hand, Harold's pen. I held it against my chest like a talisman. Somewhere across the city, Kevin was sleeping in the house I had paid for, dreaming of the money he would take from his locked-away mother. Brenda was beside him, satisfied with her carefully constructed lies. They thought I was weak. They thought I would comply. They thought the Ruth Mitchell they knew would crumble and submit. But that Ruth Mitchell burned in the fire with the photographs. This Ruth Mitchell was going to war, the refuge of dignity. Harold Pemberton III was not what he appeared to be. I discovered this on my 4th day at Mercy House, when I finally worked up the courage to visit the men's wing of the Connie. It was a converted warehouse on the edge of over the Rhine, with industrial windows and donated furniture and the smell of decades of meals cooked for those with nowhere else to go. Harold had chosen this place, refused the comfortable prison his children had prepared for him, said he wanted to spend his final days among people who hadn't forgotten how to be human. I found him in the common room, sitting by a window, watching pigeons on the fire escape. "Ruth!" His face lit up when he saw me. "They haven't caught you yet." "You knew? I know everything that matters in this city." He gestured to the empty chair beside him. "Sit. Tell me what happened." I told him. All of it. The papers. Brenda's lies. The scheduled hearing. My midnight flight. He listened without interrupting, his pale blue eyes sharp with attention. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "Your son is a fool," he said. "But you already knew that." "I raised him, Harold. How did I raise someone capable of this?" "You didn't raise this. This is his choice, his wife's influence, his own weakness." He reached out and adjusted my collar, a gesture so paternal and unexpected that I felt tears sting my eyes. "You're stronger than they counted on. That's why they're scared. I'm not strong. I'm hiding in a shelter. You're regrouping. There's a difference." He smiled, and for a moment I saw the man he must have been 50 years ago. Commanding, confident. "Ruth, may I tell you something about myself?" "Of course. I'm not a poor man. I was born Harold Pemberton III, heir to Pemberton Industrial Supply. My grandfather built the company that supplied half the factories in Ohio for 60 years. When he died, my father took over. When my father died, I took over. When I retired, my children took over." I stared at him. His clothes were shabby. His room in the shelter was smaller than a prison cell. "Then what are you doing here?" "My children decided I was in the way." "Sound familiar?" His laugh was dry. "They wanted control of the company. They wanted my signature on documents I hadn't read. When I refused, they did exactly what your son is trying to do. Declared me incompetent. Tried to have me committed. What happened? I had better lawyers than they expected, and more money hidden than they knew about." His eyes gleamed. "I won. But the victory cost me everything I thought I cared about. My reputation, my family, the company I spent my life building. I realized none of it mattered." "So you came here?" "I came here to find out what does matter, and I found it." He gestured around the room. "These people, the woman who shares her bread even when she's hungry, the man who gives up his blanket for someone sicker than him, the volunteers who show up at 6 a.m. because they believe in human dignity." He looked at me. "And you, Ruth. You came every week to visit an old man nobody cared about. You brought me books and sat with me for hours. You treated me like a person when everyone else saw a burden." I didn't know what to say. I had visited Harold because he was kind, because his stories made me laugh, because I recognized the loneliness that comes when your family sees you as an obstacle. "I'm dying, Ruth." The words hung in the air between us. "The doctors give me a few months. Congestive heart failure. Nothing to be done about it at my age, and I wouldn't want anything done." He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a worn photograph. A young man in a tailored suit, standing in front of a factory. That was me in 1952, 22 years old, ready to conquer the world. I thought power was money. I thought legacy was buildings with your name on them. I was wrong about everything. "Harold, let me finish." He tucked the photograph away. "I've been watching you, Ruth. Not in a strange way, in an observant way. I've been in this shelter for 8 months, and I've seen a lot of people come through. Some of them are here because of bad luck. Some because of bad choices. Some because the world is cruel to those without protection. You're different. You're here because you refuse to be a victim. I'm here because my son betrayed me. You're here because when your son betrayed you, you fought back. Do you know how rare that is? Most people in your position surrender. They sign the papers. They go to the facility. They die within a year, not from illness but from broken hearts." He took my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "You chose war. I respect that more than you know." We sat in silence for a while, watching the pigeons. I thought about Kevin as a boy, the way he used to climb into my lap after nightmares, the way he called me mommy, until he was embarrassed by the word. How does love curdle into this? Harold, what do I do now? For now, you stay hidden. You stay safe. You gather your strength. He released my hand. And you trust that when the time comes, you'll know exactly what to do. That evening, I received an unexpected visitor. Brandon came through the shelter doors just after dinner, looking lost and afraid until he spotted me in the corner of the women's common room. My grandson was 23, tall like his father but with softer eyes, kinder eyes. He had always been the gentle one. Grandma. He rushed to me, wrapping me in a hug that felt like salvation. I've been looking everywhere. Are you okay? How did you find me? I remembered you mentioning this place once. You said it was where the real saints worked. He pulled back, holding my shoulders, examining my face like I might disappear. Grandma, I know what they're trying to do. I heard everything. What did you hear? He sat down beside me, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. Dad and Mom have been planning this for months. They're in debt, bad debt. Dad's business failed, and he took out loans, and now they owe people who don't forgive late payments. They need your house, your savings, everything. How much do they owe? I don't know exactly, but I heard Mom on the phone with someone threatening them. She was crying. He shook his head. They told everyone you're confused, that you've been having episodes. Dad did a TV interview this morning. I know, I saw it. It's disgusting, Grandma. He was acting so worried, so concerned. But I saw his face last night at dinner. He was laughing about how easy it was going to be. The betrayal deepened. My own son, laughing at my destruction. Brandon, why are you here? If they find out you've been talking to me, I don't care. His jaw set in a line I recognized from his grandfather. From Frank. You raised me, Grandma. When I was 12 and Dad and Mom sent me to military school because I was too sensitive, you drove 4 hours every weekend to visit me. When I came out in college and they didn't speak to me for 6 months, you called me every single day. You're the only person in this family who ever loved me without conditions. I took his face in my hands, this beautiful boy who had somehow grown into a beautiful man despite everything. What are you saying, Brandon? I'm saying I'm on your side. Whatever you need, whatever you're planning, I'm in. His eyes were fierce. And I'm going to prove to the world who you really are. That could cost you everything. Your family, your inheritance, your future. My future is with someone who actually loves me, not people who'd throw their own mother away for money. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a phone. I recorded their conversation, Grandma. The one where Dad laughed. The one where Mom talked about which nursing home would be cheapest to keep you in while they sold everything. I have proof. My hands trembled as I took the phone. My son's voice filled the small speaker. Easiest thing in the world. The old bat thinks everyone still loves her. By the time she realizes what's happening, she'll be drooling in some facility and we'll have everything. Brenda's voice responded. And Brandon won't interfere? Brandon's too much of a pushover to do anything. Besides, he'll get his share eventually. Once Ruth's out of the picture, the recording ended. Brandon's eyes were wet. I'm sorry, Grandma. I'm so sorry they're like this. I pulled him close, feeling his shoulders shake with quiet sobs. My son was a monster. My daughter-in-law was worse. But my grandson was still human. Don't be sorry, I whispered. Be ready. When this is over, they'll understand exactly who they tried to destroy. He pulled back, wiping his eyes. What are you going to do? I'm not sure yet. But I know one thing. I thought of Harold, of his sharp eyes and hidden fortune, of the way he watched people, assessed them, understood them. I'm done being underestimated, and I'm done playing by their rules. Brandon nodded. What do you need from me? Go back. Pretend nothing has changed. Watch them. Listen. Report everything to me. You want me to spy on my own parents? I want you to document the truth. Can you do that? He took a long breath. Then he squared his shoulders. Grandma, I'm going to prove to the world who you really are. That's a promise. After he left, I returned to Harold's room. He was still by the window, watching the city lights flicker on. I saw your grandson. he said without turning. Good boy. Loyal. He's the only good thing that came from my son. Sometimes that's enough. He finally turned to look at me. Ruth, I meant what I said earlier. I've been watching you. Planning, in my own way. When I die, I'm going to leave you something. Harold, no, I don't need— You don't understand. His smile was knowing. I'm going to leave you everything. $50 million. All of it. I couldn't breathe. Use it wisely, he said. Use it to protect yourself. Use it to protect people like us. And use it to show your son what real power looks like. The lights of Cincinnati glittered beyond the window like stars fallen to earth. And somewhere across the city, my son slept peacefully, dreaming of the fortune he thought was his. He had no idea what was coming. Harold Pemberton III died on a Tuesday morning in March, with my high, a gentle departure from a world he had long since made peace with. Ruth, he whispered in the hour before the end, his voice thin as paper. Come closer. I leaned in, my ear near his lips, holding his hand between both of mine. I want to tell you about the man I used to be. He spoke slowly, stopping often to gather breath, and I listened as his life unfolded like a map of a country I had never visited. Harold Pemberton III had been born in 1931 to one of Cincinnati's oldest industrial families. His grandfather had built Pemberton Industrial Supply from a single warehouse into an empire that supplied factory equipment to half the Midwest. His father had expanded it further, making the Pemberton name synonymous with quality and reliability. I grew up believing I was special, Harold said, not because of anything I did, just because of who my family was, the name on the building, the seats at the opera, the politicians who came to our Christmas parties. He had taken over the company at 32 after his father's heart attack. He had run it with cold efficiency for 40 years, expanding into new markets, crushing competitors, building the fortune his children would eventually try to steal. I was ruthless, Ruth. I destroyed men's careers. I bought companies just to shut them down. I told myself it was business, but it was power. I loved power more than I loved anything else. His wife had died young, of cancer. His children had grown up with nannies and boarding schools while he worked 80-hour weeks. By the time he realized what he had lost, it was too late. My sons came to me when I was 75. They said it was time to step aside, to let the next generation take over. I thought they wanted my guidance, my wisdom. He laughed, a dry sound like leaves rustling. They wanted my signature. Documents that would transfer control of everything. Documents that would give them power of attorney over my personal finances. He had refused. They had retaliated. A psychiatrist's evaluation, arranged without his knowledge. Witnesses who testified to confusion and memory loss. A court date that came before he fully understood what was happening. I was lucky. I had an old lawyer, a friend from college who smelled something wrong. He helped me hide assets they didn't know about. He found me other lawyers who weren't afraid of my children. The case was thrown out, but you still lost. I lost my family. I lost my company. I lost my name. He squeezed my hand weakly. But I found something better. I found the truth about what matters. He had given away most of his fortune, quietly. Anonymous donations to shelters, food banks, free clinics. He had kept just enough to live comfortably, but he chose not to live comfortably. He chose this shelter, these strangers, this simplicity. I wanted to see if anyone would be kind to me when I had nothing to offer. No name, no money, no power. His eyes found mine. You were kind. Every week you came. You brought books and conversation and dignity. You treated me like a human being. You are a human being, Harold. I know that now. It took me 90 years to learn it. He closed his eyes for a moment. I changed my will, Ruth. 3 months ago. Everything I have goes to you. Harold, I can't. $50 million. His eyes opened again, sharp despite his weakness. I kept it hidden. My children don't know it exists. Accounts in Switzerland, in the Caymans, in Singapore. My lawyer has all the details. When I'm gone, it all belongs to you. I was crying now, tears falling onto our joined hands. Why me? Because you showed me that kindness still exists. Because you're fighting the same fight I fought, and I want you to win. Because you're going to do something I never could. He pulled my hand to his lips and kissed it with the last of his strength. "You're going to turn this money into justice." "I don't know how." "Yes, you do." His smile was peaceful. "You've been a nurse for 35 years. You know how to heal what's broken. Now you have the resources to do it on a scale you never imagined." The morning light grew stronger, filling the room with gold. "Harold, thank you. For everything. Thank you, Ruth. For reminding me why I wanted to live." He took a long, slow breath. "I'm tired now. I think I'll rest." He closed his eyes. I held his hand as his breathing slowed. I held his hand as the pauses between breaths grew longer. I held his hand as the last breath came. A gentle sigh, and then silence. I sat with him for an hour after he was gone, thinking about his life, his choices, his final gift. The man who had everything had chosen to die with nothing, surrounded by strangers who had become more family than his own blood. The shelter director found me there and took care of the arrangements. Harold had left instructions. No funeral, no announcements. Cremation and his ashes scattered in the Ohio River, where his grandfather had started with a single barge of steel supplies a century ago. 2 days later, I met with Harold's lawyer. James Whitfield was 70 years old, with the weathered dignity of a man who had spent his career navigating the darkest corners of wealthy families. His office was on the 43rd floor of the Carew Tower, all glass and old leather, and the quiet hum of power. "Mrs. Mitchell." He rose to shake my hand. "Harold spoke of you often in these final months. Please, sit." He laid out the documents with the precision of a surgeon. Account statements, trust structures, investment portfolios. Numbers so large they seemed abstract, like distances between stars. "The total value of Harold's estate as of this morning is $52,400,000. Whitfield adjusted his glasses. "After taxes and administrative costs, you will receive approximately $50 million in liquid assets." I stared at the papers without seeing them. "There's something else." Whitfield slid a manila envelope across the desk. "Harold asked me to investigate your son's financial situation. This is what I found." Inside the envelope were bank statements, loan documents, legal filings. Kevin's business hadn't just failed. It had collapsed under the weight of fraud. He had taken out loans using my name as guarantor, forging my signature on documents I had never seen. He owed $450,000 to banks, private lenders, and at least one entity that Whitfield described only as not a legitimate financial institution. "Your son is in serious trouble, Mrs. Mitchell, the kind of trouble that doesn't go away with bankruptcy." He forged my signature. "Yes, we have proof." Whitfield leaned back. "I should tell you that Harold anticipated this moment. He gave me specific instructions." "What instructions?" "He told me to tell you that you now have 2 choices. You can expose your son immediately, have him arrested for fraud, and let the justice system handle everything. Or you can wait, gather more evidence, position yourself strategically, and when the moment is right, ensure that his consequences are not just legal, but total." I thought about Kevin as a baby, sleeping on my chest. I thought about Kevin laughing about how easy it would be to have me committed. "Harold also left you this." Whitfield handed me a handwritten note, Harold's elegant script shaking with the tremors of age. "Ruth, money is not power. Power is knowing who you are and refusing to let anyone take that from you. Use this wisely, not for revenge, but for justice. There's a difference. Build something that lasts. Protect those who cannot protect themselves. And when you finally face your son, do it not as a victim, but as a queen. Your friend, Harold." I folded the note carefully and placed it in my pocket, next to the fountain pen he had given me months ago. "Whitfield, I'd like you to begin purchasing my son's debts." Quietly, through intermediary companies. His eyebrows rose slightly. "All of them?" "Every single one. The mortgage, the business loans, the credit cards, the dangerous loans from people who aren't legitimate." I met his eyes. "I want to own everything my son owes. That will take time to arrange. I have time, and I have patience." I stood and offered my hand. Harold was right. Money isn't power, but it's a very effective weapon in the hands of someone who knows how to use it. Whitfield smiled for the first time, a thin expression of professional admiration. "I'll begin immediately, Mrs. Mitchell." I walked out of his office into the bright March afternoon. The city spread below me, full of people living their lives, unaware of the quiet revolution being planned in their midst. In my pocket, the next 3 months transformed me into someone I barely recognized. I had spent 35 years as a nurse. I knew how to care for bodies, heal wounds, comfort the dying. I knew nothing about finance, real estate, corporate structure, or the Byzantine mechanisms through which wealth becomes power. So I learned. James Whitfield introduced me to Maria Chen, a financial advisor who specialized in what she delicately called complex family situations. Maria was 45, sharp as a scalpel, and unimpressed by sentiment. In our first meeting, she laid out the reality of my situation with clinical precision. "You have $50 million. That sounds like a lot, but it disappears quickly if you don't know what you're doing. Bad investments, emotional decisions, parasitic advisors. I've seen inheritances this size vanish in 3 years. What do I need to know?" "Everything." She slid a stack of books across the table. "Finance, real estate, corporate governance. Read these, then we'll talk about strategy." I read them. All of them. I sat in my small room at the shelter, surrounded by women recovering from violence and loss, and I absorbed knowledge like oxygen. When I didn't understand something, I researched until I did. When I found gaps in the books, I asked Maria to fill them. "You're a fast learner," she said after our third meeting. "Most people in your position want someone else to handle everything. I spent 35 years trusting other people with things that mattered. My son, my finances, my family. Look where that got me." She smiled approvingly. "Good answer." Meanwhile, Brandon fed me information from inside the enemy camp. Kevin and Brenda had no idea I had vanished voluntarily. They believed their own story, that I had wandered away in a state of dementia, that I was lost somewhere, confused and vulnerable. They had hired a private investigator to find me, but they hadn't looked very hard. The truth was, they were more concerned with the legal paperwork than with my actual welfare. "The hearing was delayed," Brandon reported during one of our secret meetings at a coffee shop miles from his parents' neighborhood. "Their lawyer is trying to figure out how to proceed without you present. Some judges will grant emergency guardianship anyway. Others won't." "Which kind do they have?" "The second kind. He wants you found and evaluated before he'll sign anything." "Good. That bought me time." "What about their finances?" Brandon pulled out his phone, scrolling through photos he'd taken of documents left carelessly on kitchen counters and office desks. "It's worse than I thought, Grandma. Dad owes money to someone named Victor Sorkin." I looked him up. "He's connected to people who don't negotiate." Victor Sorkin. I wrote the name in my notebook and passed it to Whitfield the next day. "That's a problem," Whitfield said after researching. "Sorkin isn't a legitimate lender. He's a money man for organized crime. Your son borrowed $200,000 from him at interest rates that would make a loan shark blush. He's already missed 3 payments. How much does he owe now? With penalties and interest? Close to $350,000. I thought about this. My son had sold himself to criminals to fund a failing business, then tried to steal from his own mother to pay his debts. The logic was twisted but coherent. If I were committed, he would control my assets. He could sell my house, drain my savings, and possibly escape Sorkin's grip. Buy the debt." Whitfield blinked. "Excuse me?" "Contact Sorkin. Offer to purchase Kevin's debt at face value plus 10%. Make it anonymous. Use one of the shell companies." "Mrs. Mitchell, these are not people who typically negotiate. Everyone negotiates when the price is right, and they'd rather have guaranteed money now than chase a deadbeat for years." I leaned forward. "Buy the debt. Then buy everything else he owes. The mortgage, the business loans, the credit cards. All of it." Whitfield studied me with new respect. "You've thought about this." "I've thought about nothing else." The purchases took 8 weeks to complete. Kevin owed money to 14 different creditors, ranging from Bank of America to Sorkin's shadow operation to a credit card company that charged 27% interest. One by one, through a maze of shell companies and intermediaries, I bought them all. I also bought the building where Kevin's failed business had its office. and the strip mall where Brenda's sister had a nail salon, and 12 residential properties in their neighborhood, including the house directly across the street from their own. "You're building an empire," Maria observed during one of our strategy sessions. "A quiet one, but an empire nonetheless." "I'm building leverage." She nodded slowly. "Have you thought about what comes next, after you own everything?" "Every day." In late May, I moved out of the shelter, not back to my old house, that would have been too obvious, but to a penthouse apartment downtown that offered views of the entire city. I furnished it simply: a desk, a comfortable chair, the books Maria had given me, Harold's pen in a drawer by my bed. I hired staff, a driver named Marcus, a former Marine who asked no questions, an assistant named Patricia, a middle-aged woman who had once run operations for a Fortune 500 company before burnout sent her seeking simpler work, a security consultant named David who assessed my apartment, my movements, and my vulnerabilities, then made recommendations I implemented without hesitation. "You're serious about this," Patricia said after her first week. "I'm serious about surviving," I corrected. "Everything else follows from that." I began making public appearances, carefully chosen events, charity galas where old money mingled with new, business conferences where deals were made in whispered conversations. I introduced myself as Ruth Mitchell, investor and philanthropist. I wore elegant clothes and spoke with confidence I had learned to project. People assumed I came from wealth. I didn't correct them. One evening in June, I attended a dinner for the Cincinnati Foundation for the Arts. The guest of honor was a venture capitalist named Thomas Bradley, who had made his fortune in tech and now spent it on cultural causes. We were seated together, and he proved to be excellent company. Intelligent, curious, and genuinely interested in the stories people told about themselves. "What's your background, Mrs. Mitchell?" he asked over dessert. "I was a nurse for 35 years. Emergency rooms mostly, ICUs, nursing homes at the end." His eyebrows rose. "And now?" "Now I'm learning that the skills I developed saving lives translate surprisingly well to other arenas." He laughed. "I imagine they would. Nurses are the most competent people in any hospital. The doctors just don't like to admit it." "That's been my experience." He handed me his card. "If you ever want to discuss investment strategies, I'd be happy to talk. I have a feeling you're going to do interesting things with your resources." I tucked the card into my purse and smiled. Interesting was one word for it. By July, I owned $2.3 million in debts belonging to my son and daughter-in-law, plus real estate worth another $1.8 million in properties connected to their lives. Kevin had no idea. He still thought I was a confused old woman lost somewhere in the city, probably dead in a ditch. Brandon reported that the private investigator had given up. Kevin was now focused on having me declared legally dead, which would accomplish the same goal as guardianship, access to my assets. "How long does that take?" I asked. 7 years usually, but their lawyer is trying to expedite it, given the circumstances of your disappearance. Let them try. I stood at my penthouse window, looking down at the city Harold had once ruled from similar heights. The sunset painted the Ohio River gold and crimson. "Pemberton Holdings," I said quietly, tasting the name of the shell company that now owned my son's entire existence. "I wonder what he'll think when he finds out." My phone buzzed. A message from Whitfield. "All acquisitions complete. You now own every debt Kevin Mitchell has ever incurred. Mortgage, business loans, credit cards, Victor Sorkin's paper, all of it. What are your instructions?" I typed my response slowly, savoring each word. "Begin foreclosure proceedings. All properties. Simultaneously. Give him 30 days' notice, as required by law. Not a day more." I sent the message and set down the phone. Across the city, my son was probably eating dinner with his wife, complaining about creditors who wouldn't stop calling, dreaming of the money he thought was rightfully his. He had no idea that the creditors had all sold their debts to the same buyer. He had no idea that the woman he had tried to destroy now held his entire life in her hands. And he had no idea that in exactly 30 days, everything he had built on lies and theft would come crashing. I watched from across the street, seated in the back of a black SUV with tinted windows, as Deputy Michael Torres approached the front door of my son's house. The house I had helped him buy 15 years ago. The house where my grandchildren had taken their first steps. The house Kevin had mortgaged 3 times to fund his failing business and gambling debts he thought no one knew about. Deputy Torres knocked. I could see him through the windshield, a stocky man in his 50s who had probably served papers 1,000 times and still found no pleasure in it. Kevin opened the door in a bathrobe. It was 10 a.m. on a weekday, and he wasn't dressed. The business he no longer had couldn't fail any more completely than it already had. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could read the body language. Torres handed over the documents. Kevin's face went from annoyed to confused to panicked in the space of 30 seconds. He started gesturing, arguing, his voice rising loud enough that I could hear the tone, if not the words, through the closed car window. Brenda appeared behind him. She was dressed for something, a yoga class maybe, or brunch with the other suburban wives who had been her shield against reality. When she saw the papers in Kevin's hands, her face went pale. Torres remained calm, professional. He had seen this before. Rich people who never thought the rules applied to them, suddenly discovering that they did. Kevin tried to close the door. Torres put his foot in the gap. More documents, more explanations. Kevin's protests grew louder, more desperate. Then Torres stepped aside, and 2 more deputies emerged from a van parked down the street. They carried boxes, empty boxes for packing possessions. The eviction had begun. I had given them exactly 30 days' notice, as required by Ohio law. Kevin had apparently assumed it was a mistake, or a negotiating tactic, or anything other than what it actually was. He had made no arrangements, found no new housing, prepared nothing. That was his pattern. Assume the worst wouldn't happen. Assume someone else would fix it. Assume that Ruth Mitchell, his demented old mother, would somehow appear with money to save the day. Not this time. Brenda burst into tears. Not delicate tears. Ugly crying. The kind that twists your face and makes you look decades older. She was on her phone, probably calling lawyers, friends, anyone who might help. No one would help. I had made sure of that. Every lawyer in the city who specialized in foreclosure defense had received retainers from Pemberton Holdings over the past 2 weeks. Conflict of interest prevented them from taking Kevin's case. The few remaining options were either incompetent or unavailable. Kevin punched the wall beside the door. Even from across the street, I could see his knuckles come away bloody. Good. Let him feel something real for once. By noon, neighbors had gathered to watch. The same neighbors Kevin and Brenda had entertained at barbecues, borrowed sugar from, complained to about rising property taxes. Now they stood on manicured lawns and watched as everything the Mitchells owned was carried out of their house and loaded into a moving truck. That was when the news van arrived. Brandon had tipped off his contact at Channel 9, an anonymous source with details about a prominent local businessman losing his home to foreclosure. The kind of human interest story that played well in the evening news cycle. The reporter was a young woman with perfect hair and predatory instincts. She approached Kevin with a microphone as he stood on his lawn, surrounded by boxes, his wife sobbing beside him. "Mitchell, can you tell us what happened here today?" Kevin's face contorted. I knew that expression. I had seen it when he was a teenager, caught in lies, cornered by consequences. He wanted to lash out. He wanted to blame someone else. But the camera was rolling. "This is a misunderstanding," he said through gritted teeth. "A clerical error. My lawyers are handling it. Our sources say you owe nearly $500,000 to various creditors, and that all your debts were recently purchased by a single holding company. Is that accurate?" Kevin's eye twitched. "I don't know where you're getting your information, but the holding company is called Pemberton Holdings. Do you know who owns it?" He didn't answer. He couldn't answer. He didn't know. But I could see in his eyes that he was starting to wonder. The reporter turned to Brenda. "Mrs. Mitchell, there are also allegations that your family attempted to have a relative declared mentally incompetent. Can you comment on that?" Brenda's tears stopped instantly. Her face went hard. "Who told you that?" "I'm not at liberty to reveal my sources. This is harassment. This is slander. We're going to sue." Brandon stepped out from behind the news van. My grandson looked different than I remembered. Taller, somehow. Straighter. He walked toward his parents with the confidence of someone who has finally chosen a side. "Brandon?" Kevin's voice cracked. What are you doing here? Did you tell them? I told them the truth, Dad. Brandon's voice was steady. About how you tried to have Grandma committed so you could steal her money. About the forged signatures on loan documents. About how you laughed when you thought she was helpless. That's not... You don't understand. I recorded you. Brandon held up his phone. I recorded everything, and I've given copies to the reporter, the police, and Grandma's lawyers. The silence that followed was absolute. Kevin stared at his son like he was seeing a stranger. Brenda looked between them, calculations visibly running behind her eyes, trying to figure out how to spin this, how to survive this. You ungrateful little... Kevin started toward Brandon, his bloody hand clenched. Marcus, my driver, stepped out of the SUV and positioned himself between them. 6'4", 230 pounds of muscle and military training. Kevin stopped. Mitchell. Marcus's voice was perfectly calm. I wouldn't recommend that. Kevin's face went from rage to fear, to something I had never seen in him before. Defeat. The reporter was still filming. Every word, every gesture, every moment of his humiliation captured for the evening news. I could have stepped out of the car, could have revealed myself right then, watched his face as he realized his victim had become his executioner. But not yet. The moment wasn't right. Instead, I watched as Brandon walked over to his father, close enough to speak quietly, but not too quietly for the microphone to pick up. You broke the only person who ever really loved you, Dad. You tried to destroy her because you couldn't handle your own failures. And now, you're going to face the consequences. He turned and walked back toward the SUV without looking at his mother. Kevin called after him. Brandon, wait. I can explain. But Brandon didn't stop. He climbed into the back seat beside me, and Marcus closed the door behind him. Are you okay? I asked quietly. I'm better than okay. His eyes were wet, but his voice was strong. That was the hardest thing I've ever done, and the best. I took his hand and squeezed it. Through the window, I watched Kevin collapse onto his lawn, surrounded by the wreckage of his life. Brenda was screaming at the deputies, at the reporter, at anyone who would listen. The neighbors were recording on their phones. The news camera kept rolling. The story would be on every local channel by evening. By morning, it would be picked up by national outlets. The internet would do the rest. My phone buzzed. A message from Whitfield. Kevin Mitchell just received a business card from an anonymous messenger. Pemberton Holdings. Meeting request for tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. at your downtown office. He doesn't know who will be waitin'. The morning light filled my office with gold. I had chosen this space carefully. The 47th floor of the Scripps Center, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Ohio River. Minimalist furniture in warm woods and soft leather. Fresh flowers on the credenza. The kind of quiet luxury that whispered power rather than shouting it. I sat with my back to the door, facing the window. Harold's pen lay on the desk beside a thin folder containing everything I needed. Behind me, Patricia monitored the security feeds while pretending to organize files. They're in the elevator, she said quietly. Both of them. I had invited only Kevin. Brenda had apparently decided to come along, perhaps thinking she could negotiate, manipulate, salvage something from the wreckage. Let her try. The elevator chimed. Footsteps in the reception area. Muffled voices. My receptionist, calm and professional, directing them to the corner office. The door opened. I didn't turn around. I listened to them enter, to their breathing, to the small sounds of confusion as they found themselves facing the back of a leather chair. Hello? Kevin's voice was hoarse, exhausted. He had probably slept in his car last night. We're here for the meeting, with the owner of Pemberton Holdings. I let the silence stretch. 5 seconds. Enough time for them to wonder, to worry, to feel the power balance tipping. Then I spun the chair around. Kevin's scream was not a word. It was a sound ripped from somewhere deeper than language. Shock and horror and recognition all at once. He stumbled backward, nearly falling, catching himself on the edge of a side table. Mom? Brenda didn't scream. Her face simply went white, then gray, as she understood what was happening and realized there was no escape. Good morning, Kevin. My voice was calm, steady. The voice I had used for 35 years to comfort dying patients and their families, now repurposed for something else entirely. Please, sit down. He couldn't move. He stood frozen, staring at me like I was a ghost. I said, "Sit down." The command in my voice was enough. He collapsed into the chair across from my desk. Brenda remained standing, her back against the closed door, her eyes darting around the room looking for exits that didn't exist. "You're dead," Kevin whispered. "They said you were dead. Confused, wandering, probably dead in a ditch somewhere?" "Yes, that's what you told everyone, wasn't it?" I folded my hands on the desk. "I wasn't dead, Kevin. I was watching." "But how? The money. Pemberton Holdings. Harold Pemberton was a friend of mine, a good friend. He left me his fortune when he died." I let that sink in. $50 million. More than enough to buy every debt you've accumulated, every lie you've told, every crime you've committed in my name. Brenda found her voice. "Ruth, I don't know what you think happened, but we were worried about you. We were just trying to help." "Don't." The single word silenced her. I opened the folder on my desk and spread its contents across the surface. Bank statements, loan documents, the forged signature that matched mine well enough to fool a bank officer but not a forensic analyst, the psychiatric evaluation from a doctor Kevin had bribed, the witness statements full of lies, and the recording Brandon had made, transcribed and notarized. "I know everything," I said. "Every dollar you stole, every document you forged, every lie you told. I know about Victor Sorkin and the $200,000 you borrowed from organized crime. I know about the hearing you scheduled to have me committed so you could sell my house while I rotted in a nursing home." Kevin's hands were shaking. "Mom, please, I can explain. The business failed and we were desperate and I thought—" "You thought your mother was a convenient source of income. You thought I was weak, disposable." I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city that had watched my transformation from victim to victor. "You were wrong. What do you want?" Brenda's voice was sharp now, calculating, still looking for an angle. "Money? An apology? Name your price." I turned to face her. "I don't want your money. You don't have any. I already own every asset you possess." "Then what?" "I want the truth, on record, signed and witnessed." I pressed a button on my desk. Patricia entered with a video camera and set it on a tripod facing the two chairs where Kevin and Brenda sat. "You're going to confess. Everything. The fraud, the forgery, the attempted commitment, all of it. And then you're going to sign documents acknowledging what you did." "And if we refuse?" Brenda asked. "Then I turn everything over to the prosecutor, the FBI, given the wire fraud involved in the interstate loans. Victor Sorkin, who doesn't take kindly to people who try to avoid their debts by hiding behind family court proceedings." I smiled. I imagine he'd be very interested to learn that the money Kevin promised him was supposed to come from stealing from his own mother. Kevin made a sound like a wounded animal. "Or," I continued, "you can confess, sign the documents, accept the consequences of your actions, foreclosure, bankruptcy, whatever comes next, and I won't pursue criminal charges. You'll be broke, but you'll be free." "That's not fair," Brenda hissed. "After everything we—" "Fair?" I walked back to my desk and picked up Harold's pen. The same pen I had carried with me since the night I fled. The pen I had held while watching my photographs burn. "You tried to have me committed to a psychiatric facility so you could steal everything I owned. You forged my signature on loan documents. You told the world I was senile, confused, probably dead. And you laughed about it." I set the pen on the desk between us. "This is more than fair. This is mercy you haven't earned." The silence stretched. Kevin stared at the documents, the camera, the pen. Brenda's calculations finally reached their conclusion. There was no winning this. There was only damage control. "Kevin," she said quietly, "we have to sign. But there's no other option." Her voice was flat, defeated. "She wins." Kevin looked at me, really looked at me. Perhaps for the first time since he was a child. "Mom, I'm sorry. I don't know what happened to me, how I became this, but I'm so sorry." I studied his face. The tears were real. The guilt might even be genuine. but I had seen too much to trust easily ever again. Kevin, you spent your whole life believing that money was power. That success meant having more than everyone else, that you could take whatever you wanted because the rules didn't apply to you. I sat down and pushed the documents toward him. But real power isn't money. Real power is knowing who you are without having to destroy anyone else to prove it. He picked up the pen. His hand trembled as he signed. Some lessons can only be learned by losing everything, son. I hope you learn yours. Brenda signed after him. No tears, no apologies, just cold efficiency, cutting her losses and moving on. She would survive. She would probably leave Kevin within the year. Find some other mark. Start the cycle again. Some people never learned. But Kevin might. Patricia notarized the documents and stopped the recording. Security escorted Kevin and Brenda out of the building, past the reporters Brandon had tipped off, into the bright morning light where cameras captured their walk of shame. I stayed at the window and watched them go. Brandon appeared beside me. You were magnificent, Grandma. I put my arm around him. I couldn't have done it without you. What happens now? Now? I smiled. Now we build something that matters. 3 months later, I stood at the entrance of the Harold Pemberton Foundation for Elder Protection. The ribbon stretched across the doorway, red silk gleaming in the autumn sun. Cameras clicked. Reporters shouted questions. Dignitaries smiled and nodded. I wore a blue suit that would have cost more than my first car. My hair was styled, my makeup perfect, my posture straight. The cover of Fortune magazine had called me the nurse who became a mogul. The Cincinnati Enquirer preferred Guardian Angel of the Forgotten. I didn't care about the titles. I cared about the work. The foundation would provide legal services to elderly victims of financial abuse, medical advocacy for seniors in nursing homes, investigation services for families who suspected exploitation. Everything Harold had wished someone had done for him, we would do for others. I cut the ribbon with Harold's pen, feeling its weight in my hand, remembering the old man who had seen something valuable in me when my own son saw only a source of income. The crowd applauded. Brandon stood in the front row, beaming with pride. Beside him was his partner, Marcus, the former Marine who had become first my driver and then something much more important to my grandson. Love found in unexpected places. I gave my speech, thanked the donors, the volunteers, the staff, spoke about Harold's vision, about the vulnerability of aging in a world that worshipped youth, about the sacred duty we owe to those who raised us. I did not mention Kevin. Afterward, at the reception, I moved through the crowd accepting congratulations and business cards and promises of support. Cincinnati's elite had decided I was someone worth knowing. I accepted their attention without illusion. They wanted access to my money, my influence, my story. That was fine. I wanted their resources for the foundation. We could use each other honestly. Near the end of the evening, Patricia approached with a concerned expression. There's someone at the back entrance asking for you. He says he's your son. I considered for a moment, then nodded. Let him in, but not to the party. Take him to the small conference room. I'll be there in 5 minutes. Kevin looked worse than I expected. Thinner, older. The confidence that had defined him was gone, replaced by something hollow and uncertain. He sat in a chair in the empty conference room, not meeting my eyes. Mom. His voice cracked. Thank you for seeing me. I sat across from him, maintaining distance. What do you want, Kevin? I just wanted you to know. I've been going to therapy, working on understanding why I became what I became. He finally looked up. The drinking, the gambling, the way I treated you. It wasn't, I'm not making excuses, but I'm trying to understand. And Brenda? Gone. She filed for divorce 2 weeks after the hearing, took what little was left and moved to Florida. He laughed bitterly. Turns out she was only interested in me when I had something to offer. I said nothing. That had been obvious from the beginning, but he hadn't been able to see it. Mom, I know I don't deserve it. But is there any chance? Is there any way we could start over? Not like before. I know that's gone. But maybe something new? Something honest? I studied my son, the boy I had raised, the man he had become, the broken person sitting before me now, Kevin. I spent a year rebuilding my life from nothing. I discovered that I was stronger than I ever knew, that I could survive losing everything and come back more powerful than before. I know. I've watched. Everyone's watched. What I learned is that forgiveness isn't a gift you give to someone who hurt you. It's a burden you set down so you can keep moving forward. I stood. I forgive you. Not for you. For me. Because carrying anger at you would poison everything I'm trying to build. His face lit with hope. But I held up my hand. Forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It doesn't mean trust. It doesn't mean we go back to Sunday dinners and pretending everything is fine. You tried to destroy me, Kevin. You have to live with that. So do I. The hope faded, but something else replaced it. Acceptance, maybe. Or the beginning of understanding. Is there anything I can do to prove I've changed? Prove it to yourself first. Prove it to Brandon. Prove it to the world. I walked to the door. If you spend the next 10 years being someone worth knowing, maybe we can talk again. But don't do it for me. Do it because it's right. I left him there and returned to the reception. Brandon was waiting. Was that Dad? Yes. What did he want? What we all want eventually. A second chance. I took my grandson's arm, but second chances have to be earned. He's got a long way to go. We walked out into the autumn evening. The foundation's lights glowed behind us, warm and welcoming. Somewhere inside, elderly men and women were already accessing services that might save them from what had almost happened to me. Grandma? Brandon said. Are you happy? I considered the question seriously. I had lost my son, my home, my old life. I had spent months hiding in a shelter, learning to be someone new. I had discovered that the family I thought I had was an illusion, and that the family I needed was much smaller than I'd imagined, but infinitely more precious. But I had also found myself. Found strength I didn't know I possessed. Found purpose in protecting others from the cruelty that had almost destroyed me. Yes, I said finally. I am. Not the happiness I expected when I was younger, but something better. Something earned. Brandon squeezed my arm. Above us, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky, the same stars Harold had watched from his shelter window, dreaming of someone who would use his fortune for something good. I thought of his note, still folded in my desk drawer. Money is not power. Power is knowing who you are and refusing to let anyone take that from you. I knew who I was now. Ruth Mitchell, nurse, survivor, builder of refuges, protector of the forgotten, and no one would ever take that from me again.